Hello, welcome to another episode of The Conscientious Biologist with me, Ben Gallagher. This is Cells 1, which is an introduction and essential overview to cells. And all life is based on cells. So this really is a very, very important presentation and will form the foundations for everything else that you'll go on to learn. So I suggest, even once you've watched it once, go back and watch it again if you're still not sure, because this really is the key fundamental lesson that all of the biology is based on. It's suitable for GCSE level, though if you're at A level and you're struggling a little bit with your understanding, there's no problem about going back and reviewing this just to make sure you've got the basic information. As always, if you like this style of learning, if you like my videos, please do subscribe to my channel. Thanks. So let's start off by asking a massive question of what is life? Now that's a really, really difficult thing to try and define. And when you were younger, you probably learnt it by this mnemonic of Mrs. Gren. You might have turned the Gren round and learnt it as Mrs. Nerg, it doesn't matter. But each one of those letters stands for something that is a vital process of life. So if we pull them up in turn, see if you can remember them from your younger days. The M is for movement. Then we've got respiration, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion and nutrition. Now if a cell can do all of those things that are over there, or if something can do all of those things over there, you could class it as life. However, what about something like fire? Fire moves, fire respires, it burns a fuel and releases carbon dioxide, it requires oxygen, essentially that's respiration. It's sensitive, you put water on it, it shrinks down, you change the temperature, it can affect it. It can grow, fires can get bigger and bigger, they can reproduce. From one fire you can start another smaller fire. They excrete their soot and their dust and their wastes, and they require nutrition. You have to keep feeding them things that they can burn. So fire, by those things, could be defined of life, when of course we know fire isn't alive. And the key thing there is because fire isn't made of cells. All life must be made of cells and be able to do those things, but that's still a kind of grey area, and we can throw a question mark over that because actually, as I put up there, there's currently no consensus regarding the definition of life. That means scientists don't agree on a final definition of what makes something alive. We've got a few good descriptions of it, and there is a generally accepted one which I'll show you in a minute. But just to really make you think about this idea of life and how strange it is, as you're looking at me through the video, I would hope you can look at me and go, well, he's alive, so he's an example of life, okay? But what if I got into an awful accident and my head got chopped off? I think anyone looking at me then would go, that's not life anymore, he's dead, because my head would be off. But what about the cells in my hands? Would they know that my head has been cut off? All these millions and millions of cells that make up my hand, would they suddenly just go, oh, head's gone, stop functioning, and then no longer be alive? I don't think so. I think every cell in my body would continue to live until, look at the bottom one on the list, until they run out of nutrients and starve to death. So just because my head was cut off wouldn't mean all my cells were suddenly dead. All the cells would continue living. So then you have to go, well, actually, then he can't think anymore. His brain wouldn't work if his head was cut off. So is it consciousness? Is it just what's in your brain that makes you alive? But then you have to think, well, there's lots of things that don't have a brain, like fungi and mushrooms and bacteria and things like that. But they're life. So it's very difficult to get this term life across. But this is the generally accepted definition. So it's organisms are open systems. Open systems means things come into them, things go out of them, so they eat, they excrete, that maintain homeostasis, which means they can keep themselves running and keep themselves at a constant. They're composed of cells, that's important. They have a life cycle, so they can grow, they can reproduce, they can restart, they can die. They can undergo metabolism, we'll talk about that in a second. They can grow, they can adapt to their environment, which is basically the sensitivity bit. Respond to stimuli, which is more about the sensitivity. They can respond to things that happen to them, reproduce and make more, and evolve. Over time they can change and get better and better and better. But that's a very complex definition. You don't need to know that definition, and I'm going to break it down to the most simple bits from that definition, and that is cells and metabolism. Okay, if you've got something that's made of cells and those cells have metabolism, you can basically class it as life. And metabolism are all of the cellular reactions. That's building things, so sticking stuff together, and breaking things down. And if a cell can build stuff and break stuff inside itself to keep itself running, then you can generally assume that's life. If it doesn't have any metabolism, you can say that cell is dead. So that's kind of the defining characteristic. So what causes metabolism? What is it inside a cell that means this metabolism can happen? And this is the most important thing in biology. What causes metabolism are proteins. Proteins are the most important thing in biology. They drive everything else along. So proteins are absolutely vital. So let's just think about what proteins are. Okay, what are proteins? What do they do? What are they for? How are they built? All the things that go with them. So there's a nice easy analogy for thinking about proteins. I'm sure you've all on telly or somewhere before have seen examples of automated factories like this one above my head here, that are just entirely filled with loads and loads of different machines, and those machines are doing all of the work. So that one in the middle there, that's one that you probably have seen on various programs before. That's an automated car factory. You can see the cars going on through the screen being built, and all those yellow machines are doing all of the work to build the cars. Well, all of those machines are basically like the proteins inside the cell. The factory is like the cell, and all of the machines that do everything are the proteins inside it. Imagine those factories. Imagine if you didn't need any people in there at all to run anything else. It was just the machines working constantly to build stuff. If there was stuff they didn't need, they broke it down. All you need to do is put the raw materials into the factory, take away the end products, and the factory could just keep on running. So proteins are like tiny biological machines inside cells. That's a really good way to think about them. They come in loads and loads of different forms. Some of them aren't like machines that you've seen on these pictures that are building stuff. Some of them are more kind of structural machines that work with like arms to grab stuff and hold stuff together. So they're more structural. So there's loads and loads of different forms of these types of machines, and they do millions of different functions within the cell. And among other things, they do all the essential tasks that keep metabolism going. So as long as you've got those proteins, the proteins can do the metabolism for the cell and make it alive, give it life. So this is the vital sentence. Therefore, if a cell can make its proteins, the proteins will do everything. So all a cell really needs to be able to do is make those proteins, because proteins do everything. That is going to come up a lot in my lessons. Proteins do everything for a cell. So if we can get you really, really understanding proteins, there's not much in biology you won't be able to learn. So let's apply that knowledge now and answer the question, what are cells and what do they need to do? So let's keep this very simple based on what we've just talked about. Cells are small compartments. They have to be a little enclosed compartment that can make very specific proteins which do everything the cells need. Really, that's it. There's loads of different ways cells can do what they do. They can use different proteins to do different things and become different types of cells. But basically, it's a compartment that can make proteins. So the proteins will do everything for the cell. So let's just put that in a diagram. What I've put there is a very, very simple form of cell there. You've got a cell membrane around the outside, and the cell membrane is the skin of the cell. It holds it together and it controls some things from entering and leaving. And of course, you have to fill that skin up. So you fill it up with a liquid called cytoplasm. So you can imagine it being kind of like a water balloon. You've got the rubber of the balloon on the outside, water in the middle. That's it. It's just kind of a blob, a compartment. Those two things are all you really need to have a cell. Now, is that cell going to have life? No, because at the moment it can't do metabolism. Why? Because it hasn't got any proteins. So we need to think about what it needs to make those proteins. So you have these little wiggly things I'm sure you're familiar with. These are chromosomes of DNA. DNA is the chemical, but those structures are called chromosomes. So always try and remember them as chromosomes of DNA and you can't really go wrong. Now, chromosomes of DNA are the instructions for how to make proteins. So that's your instructions for how to make them. So you only need something to follow those instructions and actually build them, which are these little blobs, okay? Those are ribosomes. Now, ribosomes are the builders. They can follow genetic information like DNA to make the proteins. So as long as you've got the information and a ribosome that can just go, yeah, how do I build that protein? Oh, I do that, that, and that. Yeah, no problem. Build that protein does its job. Ribosome can then build a different protein to do a different job. Okay. So those four things are all you really need to have a functional cell. Of course, there are loads of different types of cell and it's not that simple, but as long as it can make proteins, the proteins will do everything. So let's look now at the two main types of cell that exist, because there's only really two basic formats of cell that then branch out into lots of other forms. The two main types of cell are prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Okay, now let's look first at prokaryotes. Prokaryotes, generally, we can just say we're talking about bacteria. There's a few other types, but essentially prokaryotes, we're talking about bacteria. So these are much smaller, much simpler cells. But it's still based on what we covered in the last slide. They still need a cell membrane and cytoplasm because that's what makes them the little compartment. And they still need DNA. This time though, note the chromosome. Instead of being little lines, lots of little pieces, what bacteria tend to have is one sort of bigger loop where the ends have joined up, and it's called a circular chromosome. So this is a circular chromosome of DNA, but it is still just the instructions for how to make protein. What is going to make that protein? Well, the ribosomes again. There we go. There's those four key structures again that make a cell a cell. And bacteria have to have those four things because if they don't, they can't make proteins, they can't have metabolism, they can't be alive. Okay. But let's look at some of the extra stuff that bacteria also have. So bacteria generally have this. They have a cell wall around them. Now that's for strength because bacteria are single-celled organisms. They get a lot of bashing about, they can dry out, there's problems that can happen. So they have a cell wall to try and protect them a bit. A lot of bacteria also have this, a flagella. Now a flagella is a projection that comes out from the membrane that can move about, which is for movement. It acts like a tail. Now again, something that moves about, something that does something for the cell. Have a guess what a flagella is made of? It's made of protein, because proteins do everything. So a flagella is this kind of protein projection coming out from the membrane in the cell that allow it to move. Next thing they can have little structures like this. I've put 2 on there. They can have 1, they can have 20, it doesn't really matter. But plasmids are like bonus, small, little circular chromosomes of DNA. Not all bacteria have them, they don't have to have them. It's just kind of like extra bits of DNA, extra bits of information. But those are plasmids. Yes, they're basically small circular chromosomes, but they get their own name. They're called plasmids. Okay. Bacteria can also have, and commonly have, another coating all the way around them, a slime capsule. Now that's a very slimy substance. Again, provides a bit more protection, stops them drying out, makes them a bit more robust. So a slime capsule is quite a useful thing for them to have as well. Now I suggest you could take a quick screenshot there, just so you've got a picture of a main prokaryote with its main features, because you need to know all of those bits that you have in a prokaryotic cell. Okay, take a screenshot if you need to. Okay, let's add into this now eukaryotes. Now over the next few slides we're going to develop this because eukaryotes are basically everything else. If it's not a bacteria, then it's probably a eukaryotic cell. So we're going to break those down over the next few slides. But let's just give you the main groups of eukaryotes. Animals like us, so we're eukaryotes. Plants, fungi. And then another group that's a bit weird, the protista. Protista is a group of eukaryotes that is a bit of a mismatch of animals, plants and fungi. They might have a characteristic that you think, oh, they've got this certain type of cell wall, that's like a fungus. Oh, but hang on, they've got chloroplasts, so surely it's a plant. Oh, but hang on a minute, they've got an animal characteristic as well. Basically, if it doesn't fit into the group animal, plants or fungi, but it's definitely a eukaryote, you dump it in with the protista. So this is the bit now that's going to come up most often in the exams. You're likely in the exam to get a picture of a cell and you'll have to label the different parts or say what they do or draw a bit of a cell. So this is really, really important. And all eukaryotic cells are essentially the same, save for a few odd differences. So we're going to look at animal and plant cells to demonstrate that. And as I put in the title, this is a basic eukaryotic animal cell. So let's start off on the same kind of point. We've got cytoplasm, we've got cell membrane. I've put the descriptions here for you so that once we've fully built this up, you can take a screenshot and that's a really good summary. So we've got the cytoplasm, the liquid inside that allows all the chemicals to move so that they can react. It's why quite often you hear the cytoplasm described as the site of chemical reactions. It's just without the cytoplasm, the chemicals wouldn't be able to float around and hit each other and react. Cell membrane is the skin of the cell. So we know we've got a cell. We know we've got chromosomes of DNA. Notice in eukaryotes, they're the little straight chromosomes. They're called linear. Linear means something with a start and an end. So these are linear chromosomes as opposed to the circular chromosomes. But that's still just instructions for how to make proteins. And you've got the ribosomes to build the proteins. So far, it's that same basic blueprint of any cell. But because it's a eukaryote, they've got additional bonus features. For example, a nucleus. So a nucleus is an extra layer of membrane, a bubble of membrane that goes around the DNA to protect it. So the nucleus is a bubble of membrane that contains the DNA, which are the instructions for how to build proteins. Now that's really useful to be able to protect your DNA, because if the DNA got damaged and you lost those instructions, there would be some proteins that you wouldn't be able to make, which means some bits of metabolism that the cell wouldn't be able to do. Next feature. Pretty much all eukaryotic cells have mitochondria. So those structures I put there, those are mitochondria. Now you might need to recognize what they look like and tell the difference between them and some other structures. So have a good look at them and look at the shape of them. You've got an outside bubble of membrane. Again, pretty much all of the structures inside cells are made of membranes. Ribosomes are the only one that aren't. But you've got that outer bubble. Inside, you've got another layer that wiggles in and out. Okay, so that's what mitochondria look like. And those are the site of aerobic respiration. Now, I would hope that you've already heard of respiration. You know what it is. You know it's glucose reacting with oxygen to get the energy out of the glucose. Carbon dioxide and water are produced as waste products. There is a whole series of lessons on respiration, so don't worry if you can't remember all that. Just know for now, mitochondria is where aerobic respiration happens. We've then also got a small temporary vacuole that I've added there. Again, that's a little bubble of membrane. Now, please, please, please don't make the mistake of thinking plant cells have vacuoles, animal cells don't. Animal cells do, they just have small temporary ones. Whenever an animal cell's got some stuff to store, it will make a little bubble of membrane and store its stuff inside that bubble. Once it's used that stuff, that bubble can break down again. That's a vacuole, okay? Plant cells have a much larger permanent one. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so you've got a small temporary vacuole there for storage. And that's basically it. That's everything that you've got in an animal cell, a eukaryotic animal cell. So you might want to take a screenshot there because that covers everything you've got in there. Okay, what we're going to do now, we're going to convert this cell and we're going to turn it into a plant cell to show how easy that is. So look what I've done. I've taken away the cell membrane and I'm going to take away the small temporary vacuole. And look what I'm left with. I've still got the nucleus containing its DNA, protecting that DNA. The DNA that's instructions for how to build proteins, those instructions that can be followed by ribosomes to build the proteins. And you've still got the mitochondria to do the respiration to provide the energy for building those proteins and some other things. So let's now rebuild this into a plant cell. Well, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put a strong cellulose cell wall all the way around it. And please, now you're at GCSE, get used to calling it a cellulose cell wall, not just a cell wall. Because remember, the prokaryotic cell we looked at had a cell wall, but it's made of a different material. So it's important you remember this is a cellulose cell wall. That gives strength to the cell, and when you do the lessons on osmosis, you'll see some other purposes for it, because it's mainly there to stop the cell from bursting. Okay. Now if I add the membrane back in, you'll see the blue line now going around the inside of the cell wall. So the plant cell is basically just an animal cell that's kind of inflated inside the box of the cellulose cell wall, and its membrane is pressed against that inside of the cell wall. So a plant cell is basically an animal cell in a box. That's what you've got, okay? But there's a few additional features we can add. We can put a large permanent vacuole in. This is constantly there in a plant cell. The difference between a large permanent vacuole and a small temporary vacuole is as if you were comparing a big cupboard that you had in your room, Okay, huge cupboard, it's always there, you can put stuff in, you can take stuff out, you can use it for storage, it doesn't go anywhere. That's like a plant cell vacuole. Whereas an animal cell vacuole is like a little cardboard box. Okay, you can get some cardboard, fold it up, make a little box, store some stuff in it. When it's empty, you can go, I don't need this box anymore, you can throw it away. Okay, one is big and permanent, one is small and temporary. Other thing in plant cells, you've got these structures, these big green blobs. These are chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are the site of photosynthesis. That's the reaction that makes glucose, that grabs sunlight energy and locks it up in a glucose molecule. So really, really important structures to have. Again, you might want to take a screenshot there because that's all the features that you've got in a plant cell. So if you need to take a screenshot, take it now. Okay, let's move on from that then. So we've looked at those two, but now let's just add on, just for comparison, just for scale, I put a prokaryotic cell just up there above my head. Prokaryotic cells are much, much smaller than eukaryotic cells. They're about the same size as mitochondria, okay? Generally speaking, prokaryotic cells are about 10 to 100 times smaller than a eukaryotic cell. Or to phrase it a different way, eukaryotic cells are generally 10 to 100 times bigger. That's in terms of length. Obviously, if you're multiplying that up to volume, you're talking thousands of times bigger. But there's certainly eukaryotic cells are very, very big. Prokaryotic cells are very, very small. So that's thrown at you a lot of information, a lot of new terms. Let's just do a quick summary of that and get all the key information on one screen. So you can take one screenshot if you need to. So first off, a cell is the smallest unit of life. If it isn't a cell, or if you break down a cell to get at what's inside it, you've broken the cell, you've broken the life. Okay, so above me here, these are the three main cell types that you need to know. The two main eukaryotic ones, the plant and animal cells, and I've left all the labels on them with the explanations. And you've got the prokaryotic cell over there, shrunk down a little bit just to try and give you an idea of the scale. You've still got the labels on it, but they're probably too small to read on there, but you've got that key information. Secondly, cells are living if they can perform metabolism. Metabolism is carried out by proteins. So in other words, the proteins do everything that's inside the cell. Proteins are the little machines and structures that do everything inside the cell. And as long as a cell can make all its different proteins, they will carry out everything necessary to keep the cell alive and functioning. So cells must have a membrane and be filled with a liquid called cytoplasm. That's what makes them a little compartment, a little self-contained unit. Cells need genetic material, which is the DNA, and ribosomes to make the proteins. DNA is instructions, ribosomes to read the instructions and build your proteins. There's two main types of cell, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Cells can have many additional features that help them perform more efficiently, which I've just made those flash to remind you of all those different characteristics there. Now, hopefully all of that made sense, but we will slightly review it and add details onto this as we go through this sequence of lessons on cells. So from here, you need to go to cells 2, which is differentiation and specialist cells. Go on to that next. There should be a link about to appear to it on the side there that you can click on. And please, if you like these videos, if you like this way of learning, please do subscribe on my channel so you'll get alerts as I add new things. And don't forget to like this video. Thank you.